We are extremely worried about this, and that's why also European naval assets have been sent to the region, because the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the trade routes is extremely important also for European Union, but also for the Gulf countries.
There are reasons to be worried indeed. It was supposed to be quick, precise and lethal. The Epic Fury and Roaring Lion operations have ignited a new fiery conflict in the Middle East. And just a few days after, it's clear it's not going to be quick, and no precise or epic plan is appearing on the horizon. Political, military and economic shockwaves are rippling around the world. How deeply will global economy feel the impact of this conflict? And in the end, who will be left to settle the bill for the fury? Welcome to Wider View. Joining me today in our Brussels studio, Ewa Krukowska, Bloomberg News, and Tomasz Włostowski, EU strategist. Welcome to both of you. The military operation, obviously, is the most disturbing and dramatic part of this conflict, but economy immediately feels the turbulence and reacts quickly. So, judging by the reaction of the markets, what can we say about this conflict at this stage?
We can say that, first of all, the range of uncertainty is very, very wide. Second thing is that consumers around the world are fast feeling the effects of the widening war.
How fast?
Oil was trading below 100 last week. Today it broke the level of 100.
And 70 in February.
Precisely, and it's heading towards 120. At least that was the situation in the morning. So theoretically, we are headed for a situation where we see the biggest daily rise in oil prices since 1988, when futures started to trade.
Sounds dramatic, doesn't it?
Sounds dramatic, and it touches upon everything, because we can feel that in gasoline prices, in jet fuel prices, in petrol prices, also in European gas markets. So I guess nobody knows where the situation is headed. It could still get worse.
Maybe President Trump knows.
Maybe President Trump, we would have to ask him.
Right, okay. But then I won't be sure about the answer, whether we can stick to it. Anyway, Tomasz, what is your opinion on that? Where are we on that conflict, just judging by the indexes and economy?
Yes, well, I agree with Eva that the level of uncertainty is really, that's what's driving the market. And, you know, the US government and Israeli governments are not really helping, I think, because if you to zoom out a little bit and look at the broader picture, we don't really know what the objectives of this operation are. We don't know at what point we can claim success. And therefore, the markets and the major players, they're not able to really anticipate, for how long of a disruption they have to get prepared for. They cannot really anticipate when it's going to end, even observing the events, because they don't know which event's going to trigger the end of the war.
Okay. We've got about 20 odd minutes of this conversation ahead of us, and I'm just trying to ask myself a question whether there's going to be any good news in that interview. So if there's any, please flag it.
We'll raise both hands.
Yes, we'll raise three. All of us will raise our hands. Anyway, so with that in mind, that there's so little that we know about the future prospects, the potential of this conflict, whether it's going to go on or be finished, how bad is the economy now, and how bad can it get?
First of all, we have to take a look at several variables. The first one is, how long will Iran keep fighting? The second one, how long will the Gulf nations keep defending? Another one is...
Can we make any assumptions on that?
I don't think so, not
completely.
at this stage, not at this stage. Then will the US manage to reopen the strait? Is there any possible way of rerouting supplies? Because as we said, we don't know any answers to that. Uncertainty is the queen in the market.
I don't know, it's going to be one of the most frequent answers in this program.
Well, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. I'm a bit, I think, more pessimistic than ever because, the big, I think, deliverable from this war is, from Ukraine war as well, it's just the really dominating power of drones. And I think we see this already from this war, is that while I guess it's easier to take out, the ballistic missile sites and the launchers, it's extremely difficult to get rid of the drone launchers. And as long as Iran can disrupt the flow of oil and gas of oil through the Hormuz Strait, the prices will go through the roof. And it's going to be very, very difficult to secure those passages. The US, of course, claims, if the situation gets very worse, we'll provide security in terms of our military ships, basically escorting tankers.
In your opinion, both of you, actually, the question to both of you, are we on a straight path to a global energy crisis or economic crisis, or it's too far-fetched, the statement?
Look, I've had a few conversations last night, and one of my key experts actually on global energy markets says this is the biggest oil global disruption
since?
That they've no since
in their lifetime.
No sense. They said that this is the biggest oil disruption they've ever seen.
Eva?
The most dreaded word now, I guess, is stagflation, because first of all, the increase. Which is
hyper
high inflation and at the same time economic slowdown.
Going up crazily.
That's right. So we are in a situation where it's impossible to say how long the crisis will last, but we are already seeing that 1% of supply cut means 4% in the rise of oil prices. That is the numbers that my colleagues from Bloomberg Economics crunched.
Maybe you shouldn't be that scared, really. I mean, let me read a quote from Donald Trump from his Truth Social. Short-term oil prices, which will drop rapidly when the destruction of the Iran nuclear threat is over, is a very small price to pay for the US and the world, safety and peace. Only fools would think differently.
Well, it depends how you define short-term. Lawyers would probably say that it's up to 1 year, but if you talk to market participants, the expectations were that it would last a couple of days. We are now on the 10th day of the crisis, and oil prices are still skyrocketing.
Prospect of it being
prospect of it being, fading down.
Are you feeling
again more pessimistic?
President Trump?
I'm more pessimistic even because basically I think what is going to happen, I think we have to remember President Trump and the Republicans, they have midterms in November this year. And the price of gas in November in the US has to be, I'm just going to use the word okay, which means this cannot go forever. But what is likely to happen, I think, is that at some point the US is going to call it quits, regardless of where they are in the operation. President Trump is excellent in sort of shifting the narrative into whatever he wants to. So he's going to he's going to announce success at some point, and he's going to leave the theater.
What would that point be, in your opinion?
I don't know.
When things go really bad in economy?
I think when things will be very bad in the economy. Look, the US and Israel have already achieved massive aims in Iran. I mean, let's face it. The country is destroyed completely. The leadership is dead. I mean, they've obviously...
Sure, but we're not sure about the aims anyway, about the global aims.
But I think there's enough in there that if they want to call success, they can call success today even. The problem is that when the US leaves, I think the Europeans are stuck with whatever's left because Iran is a neighbor of... It's a neighbor of Europe. There's going to be greater lack of stability in the region, and Europeans are going to be the ones paying the price for that in terms of security challenges, in terms of migration, energy prices, and so on.
Okay, let's look at some details. The Strait of Hormuz is still blocked, effectively closed for the ships going in and out, and it's roughly 20% of all global oil consumption passes through that particular spot on the planet. What does this disruption really mean, but not for the global economy, but for ordinary citizens, for ordinary people, their households, and the way they are irritated at the pumps when they try to fill their cars?
First of all, it's prices at the pump, so it costs more to fill up your tank.
We can feel it already.
You can feel it already, but the prices are higher already now. At the same time, it's boosting inflation expectations. If they stay high, we've got a problem. We've got such a problem in Poland when inflationary expectations were so high that it was almost impossible to drive inflation down. That translates into economic performance.
How strong the inflation could be a result of this situation? What can we see? Can we go back to the times of the pandemic? Can we go back to the times of the beginning of the war?
Difficult to say. My colleagues at Bloomberg Economics took a look at the numbers, and they said that theoretically, if supply falls at this pace that we are seeing right now, we could see prices at $108 per barrel, 80% higher than before the war.
Almost twice as much.
We already broke that level.
You know,
today in the
when I was preparing for this program, of course, one of my first questions a couple of days ago was, are we going to hit a $100 per barrel? It got outdated very soon. That was 107.
We're now talking about 150.
No, we're talking. Are we?
Some
no, when I checked it this morning,
yeah.
it was 120. So the question is, are we heading for 200 per barrel? Now, you are the most pessimistic member of this conversation.
That's true, but that's true. But I'm also not an oil trader, so it's difficult to say. But as I've said, what I've heard is that this is the biggest disruption. Mm-hmm. And just to continue this, I mean, the challenges are everywhere. The prices are going up, not only for the consumers, but also for the industry, the gas prices. I think the narrative here in Brussels is going to be changing as well, because we're sort of in this simplification. We're a little departing from the Green Deal, but I think the arguments for the Green Deal are coming back very quickly, because it's our dependence on fossil fuels that's driving all of this. So I think everybody's going to feel this in major ways.
Right. The situation of oil that we're discussing now is actually, yes, becoming more and more alarming in spite of what we hear from the White House.
This operation is temporary to protect the homeland, but crude oil prices did fall yesterday. They remain stable today after the president announced steps to ensure the stability in global energy markets. Again, those include the DEC offering reasonably priced political risk insurance and the potential for the U.S. Navy to provide protection for the flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. It is the president's belief and his economic team's belief that the economy continues to be very strong. It's robust and will be able to weather any of the temporary impacts of Operation Epic Fury.
That was Caroline Lewitt, spokesperson for the White House. Do you agree with her that the economy will be able to weather any of the temporary impacts of Operation Epic Fury?
Well, the conflict will redefine the boundaries, I guess. But at the same time, when you speak to oil strategists, or when you listen to the executive director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, who was in Brussels a couple of days ago, he also said that in the longer term, the supplies of oil are abundant. The supplies of LNG are slightly different because Europe will be vying with Asian buyers for that gas because of the crisis. But again, he says that it's temporary dislocation. So we might see lower prices. The thing is that nobody knows when.
Well, yeah, what needs to change if we want to reverse it?
Reopening the
Hormuz Strait.
Well, 2 points. One is, I think there's this saying that there's nothing more permanent than something that's temporary. So, because it's very easy to say something's temporary when it's not a defined term. But I think more importantly, I think we have to keep in mind that Caroline is talking from a U.S. perspective. And the position of the U.S., which is an energy superpower, really, is completely different than here in Europe and around the world. So I think, as I've mentioned before, I think the impacts of this war will be much more dire for Europe than for the United States.
So we are practically going to pay for it, yes? Are we going to pay the bill for the fury?
Well, in some ways, yes, because, you know, let's look at the gas situation. The stocks are very low. We've just sort of lowered the legislation around it last year. We entered the winter, the winter was much more severe than we expected. We entered with lower stocks than we should have had. So we're now at about 30%. And now we need to restock those stocks in a time when we're phasing out Russian gas. We lost Qatari gas. And the competition for gas, the prices are very high, and the global competition that Eva mentioned with Asia is increasing. So we're not in a good position on gas.
Perhaps it's even worse than with oil, isn't it? It's, some analysts are calling that we're a triple disruption, sort of. Just let me go through these 3 points. LNG transit Strait of Hormuz is blocked. That's number one. 2, Israeli gas fields have halted production. And 3rd, Iranian pipeline exports to Turkey are under threat. That's bad. That sounds bad.
Yes, and it's also what Eva mentioned, that the global oil market is much larger and much more diverse than the LNG market, because the LNG, I mean, we need LNG export terminals, which there are only so many in the world, and there are only so many tankers in the world, and so on.
What can we do in the short term, in the short run? I don't know. Reserves, supplies.
There is already this
but the
talk
scale
about,
is just enormous.
there is already this talk about releasing oil stockpiles, but it's a not long-term solution. It's something that can temporarily help the markets.
For how
but
long?
For several weeks, months, depends on how much of oil stocks are released. The reserves are for 90 days. So it's not much. It's not much, and we cannot release them every day. So basically, again, we are back to question 1. How long will the crisis last?
What if it lasts for another couple of weeks?
Then Europe probably will be on the brink of recession.
What if it's over in a month?
Difficult to say. Also depends, how much consumption you can limit. As Tomasz said, this is the period when we need to refill our storage of gas. Normally people say winter is over, it can only get better. Not really, because during the winter you empty your storage, and when the summer and spring come, you usually refill them at lower prices. Now we cannot see the prices being lower, so it will have an impact when we start burning that fuel again in the next heating season.
Well, we can feel the results of what's happening in the Gulf in the petrol stations and filling stations, obviously. When are we going to feel it in our households? Talking about gas, for example.
Well, very soon, because again, I don't want to be that pessimistic, but because you've asked the question of, what can be done? And the truth is not much can be done, essentially. Not much can be done. Because even restoring the situation in the Middle East, which I'm very skeptical is going to happen anytime soon, because even when the war ends, the repercussions of that war will continue to trickle down through the economy. Those higher prices will remain, because it's very easy to increase the prices globally, right, and then to drop them. There is a certain level of stability that's needed that I do not think is going to come, basically.
Now, oil prices isn't just a matter of households, obviously, and household budgets, but it's also about Russia, basically speaking, getting new funds, new money, more money for the war effort against Ukraine. How does that situation change the Russian-Ukrainian war realistically?
Well, indeed, there are concerns that it may feed Putin's war machine. But first of all, we had an interview yesterday with Finland's Alex Stubb, and he said that you can look at it from the perspective of the conflict in the Middle East hampering Russia's ability to cooperate with Iran on missiles, drones. So
because it's losing its allies.
Precisely.
So politically, Russia is losing. It's losing its allies for quite some time, yes? With Venezuela, we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Iran. Cuba is on the brink of crisis. But in financial terms, it's actually, Putin is actually keeping his fingers crossed.
Theoretically, yes, but in practice, he might see some obstacles. My colleagues at Bloomberg News analyzed his threat to basically end very quickly supplies of LNG to Europe. And now all the Russian gas to Europe these days in the form of LNG is coming from the Yamal LNG. If he were to cut it, think about that. Long-term supplies are under long-term contracts. That carries legal obligation to continue that contract. If you break them, you pay hefty fines. And even if it were to be legally possible to end those supplies immediately, you've got the obstacle in the form of availability of tankers. Currently, the project used, 16 tankers last year? To reroute the supplies, you would need 60.
Right. Is that good or is that bad for Vladimir Putin?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with Eva on every point. I mean, it's a short-term win for Putin. Is redirecting the gas is not as easy as he made it sound. It sounded more like a threat. I have to point out one more sort of the impact on the war in Ukraine, which is just the massive utilization of these missile interceptors that they're basically being used up for Patriot missiles and so on in the Middle East, the ones that Ukraine was basically begging to get, and the US said, well, we can't give them to you because we might need them. They're just being wasted away in a war that's really just out of choice, not out of necessity. So I think for Europe and for
that's
Ukraine,
a military aspect.
That's the military aspect, but I think there's also a geopolitical aspect, because I think it really shows where the US priorities were lying all along.
Well, it seems that in financial terms, it seems that the European citizens will be paying more for Putin's war effort, indirectly, of course, but still.
I mean, whenever you've got a conflict at this scale, it's impossible to avoid costs.
Right. Let's have we don't have much time left, but let's talk quickly about stock markets. What do you believe? What do you predict will be happening? We've seen some drops in stock markets in Europe and in the US. What's coming next?
I wouldn't even call it some drops. If you look at market capitalization, since the start of the war in Iran, $6 trillion of value has been erased. That shows you that the war is not just impacting oil and gas and energy markets, but also other sectors, like, for example, metal, aluminium, fertilizers. They are all dropping because of the crisis.
Well, absolutely. I think all the energy-intensive sectors are in deep trouble. The agricultural sector, the agricultural producing sector, is in major trouble as well. Again, because this is of the high prices and the sort of the lack of a way forward. I think.
Right, okay. I will not let you out of this studio if you don't give me one good news. Good news before we finish.
I don't have good news, but I think probably the defense contractors are going to benefit if you're looking at the stock market. I mean, I think it just shows that this is where the world is heading, and this is where the big money is.
Alexander Stubb said that interview that I mentioned.
Finland, yes.
Exactly. He said that theoretically it may accelerate, in a way, peace talks in Ukraine, stealing the limelight, but allowing some room for the negotiators. So let's see where we're headed on that.
So if there's, you wanted to add something?
Well, no, I think the other important aspect as well, and just to continue Eva's point, which is, however, we might look critically at the war, but it just also shows what a powerful military the U.S. has. And I think if you're Russian and you're looking at that operation, you're thinking this is just a massive, massive superpower that we don't really want to mess with, I think. Because, you just have to make the comparison, like how are the Russians performing in Ukraine and how is the U.S. military performing, how effective they are. And I think that is also probably going to switch some thinking in Moscow long term.
Is our growth in Europe under risk at the moment?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be sitting here. But again, it all depends on how long the conflict lasts.
And that is the big I don't know at the moment. That's it for today. Just as you've heard it many times on this program, just the war is hardly predictable at the moment. One thing is certain: it's not a long way to turn this conflict into a global economic crisis. So it needs to be closely watched. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us, Ewa Krukowska, Tomasz Włostowski. See you next time on Wider View on TVP World. Goodbye.